Miss Ann Thomas, we're here to talk about her. On the left is a book I recently published with WVU Press. It's called The Harlem Renaissance. I'm sure many of you are familiar with a time in American history called the Harlem Renaissance, which took place between 125th Street and Central Park in New York City. It was the epicenter of Black life and culture from about 1900 to about 1940, when all these thousands and thousands and millions of Black people migrated up the East Coast, where it's now an I-95 corridor, and they came from Florida and the Carolinas and Georgia and Virginia, and they moved into Washington, D.C., and they moved into Baltimore, and they moved into Philadelphia, 30th Street Station, and then they moved into what we call New Jack City, New York, Big Apple. Marcus Garvey, County Cullen, Langston Hughes, Billie Holiday, all this great migration. They moved from Jasper, which is in the Northeast, they moved from Huntsville, they moved from Inslee, and they particularly moved from the blackest county in Alabama, but no longer since they redrew all the political lines. They moved from Jefferson County, Alabama, which is Birmingham. And so that a lot of people went into Gary and Beckley and Keystone, y'all familiar with those places, in southern West Virginia. So many of them moved into West Virginia. In 1921, West Virginia became the only state that came up with something called the Bureau of Negro Statistics, because it couldn't keep up. There was so many flowing into West Virginia, particularly southern West Virginia, south of I-64 coming through Huntington. So that's a book that I worked on. And then we published a book 35 years ago called Blacks in Appalachia. And so that's a little bit better. Thank you, Sean, for making this program possible. Sean has a book called Local. I'm sure he's already sold you on that. Anyway, Sean has a book called Local Legends of Willie. I see y'all have a few coal mines around Willie. In fact, I drove up Route 2 this morning. I got up at 4 o'clock. I prepared this presentation between 4 and 6. And then I got in the car and I drove up here on Route 2. Very circuitous, beautiful along the river. I really enjoyed my ride. And I passed the Murray Energy Company and the Ohio County Mine River Corridor and the Tunnel Ridge Coal Plant. So I suppose some of you in here might know some people who were involved in coal mining or something. Or somebody might be a delegate to the United Mine Workers, if you are. I work with that organization right there called the Appalachian African American Cultural Center down in far southwest Virginia. I'm going to really has an African American Cultural Center. I thought I had a slide, but I forgot to put it up there. Because I'm going to say some things in the next few minutes that might be offensive to somebody. I've heard about something called white fragility. And some of y'all look about Joe Drag. So I'm going to say some things from my own upbringing in the 1940s. I was born in 1946. I'm 76 years old this year. Some of y'all might be getting my age. And there was some things that went on when I was 10 and 12 and 15 and 20 that I will never forget. Ever. I don't know what anybody asks me to do, I will never forget it because it's implanted into the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata, whatever your brain holds. And so let me give a cautionary note. If you grew up or you still live here in the mountains of the South, you'll see a lot of signs riding around here. I saw someone on Route 2 this morning that said, "Watch for falling rocks." Yeah. Right? And there's a legend there. Fallen Rocks was a man who was born in 1819, I heard, and he lived in Bryson City, North Carolina, which is on the Ocala Indian Reservation, Cherokees. And Fallen Rock went out deer hunting one day, and he smoked some rabbit tobacco. You ever smoked any rabbit tobacco? So y'all will admit it now, right? I didn't smoke rabbit tobacco. You never smoked rabbit tobacco. No, sir. Or yes, sir. No, sir. Oh, well, I have to admit, I spoke to that. My daddy told me he used to work. But anyway, all the lots of kind of guys spoke to that side. And he got disoriented. And they never found him again. That's why you see these signs that watch for falling rocks. They're still looking for it. All right. I use that metaphor to say, I'm going to say some things that might come down like falling rocks. Like stuff. And it might hit you in the head. You might say, no, relax. And I'm going to say that. Because I'm going to talk about race. And we have a point, a critical point in American history, but nobody wants to talk about race. So a race of people has no history, for example. It has no traditions, and it stands to be lost in the eyes of the world. And that's why I'm glad you all talk about that. So I wrote this book about my experience growing up black in Appalachia. One of the reasons I wrote about it is that I wrote it for my grandchildren. I have 4 grandchildren: Africa, Amani, Kenyatta, and Joel. You should have seen my mama's book when she used to say, "What you doing, children?" But that's enough. So I don't want anybody to say, "Whatever happened to the so-and-so people?" That's what I wrote my book. I also wrote my book because I think we have a wonderful history, and if you can't tell people about that history, you're not worthy to enjoy the blessings of what your people do. I also wrote my book because I want my children and any children, black or white, that if you get a serious education, like I was able to do, when you get discriminated against, you get black, it won't hurt you there because you know you're dealing with a moral. Can you all yet? And that there's undeniable evidence, for example, that I got to work for about 12 years of my life with that man on the left there. His name is Alex Hay. He wrote a book that you know called Autobiography of Malcolm X. Most people remember him from books, but you should go and read. If you want to understand anything about contemporary American urban life, read the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Yeah, fantastic. I got to work with Mr. Hay a long time. And in fact, when I wrote this book called Blacks in Appalachia 35 years ago, I wrote it because I was trying to get tenure as a tenured professor at the University of Kentucky. And when you're writing for white males, I'm sorry, y'all, but it was white males who were judging my tenure, I had to write so they would like it. And so I said, oh, okay, that's me. And I wrote it, and my presented this, and he said, Bill, if you ever get a chance, son, don't ever write no more crap like this. Because it was just full of demographic analyses and statistical package for the social science, all kinds of graphs and charts. And they passed on from one brother. I would say, write something that your mom would like. That's what I tried to do. There's undeniable evidence that the Lincoln School, everybody that goes to Lincoln School. You went to Lincoln School? There's undeniable evidence that the Lincoln School produced superior students. In fact, it was like my school. You see my school on the bottom right? My school was called the Lynch Colored Public School. It was inscribed in the concrete. It's still there. My mother went to the first grade of that school. All 8 of us went to that school, the Lynch Colored School, 1923. They let us know the color every day of the week. I thought I was colored. I said, yeah, I guess. The colored school lives, they're all over the South. They're named Dunbar. They're named Carter. They're named Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald built 4,500 schools for African American Jewish men. He and Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington's from all of West Virginia. Booker T. Washington, as far as I'm concerned, was more powerful, more influential than Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Barack Obama put together. Booker T. Washington, bad boy. I mean, he did Hampton Institute, Tuskegee Institute, Tuskegee Airmen, all that. Booker T. Washington, West Virginia, a coal miners. Why do we do this history? Who was it? I think his name was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And he had a poem that said, the lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives more sublime, for in departing they leave behind them footprints in the sands of time. So we're going to do a little footprint chase.
Why is history so important? Why is it taught from the primary grades to the graduate school? Why do politicians go to your state legislature tomorrow? You have some politicians in Northwest Virginia who are saying some things about history that scare me to death. Any rocks falling there? Some of y'all getting awful quiet. As my grandma used to say, you can hear a gnat pee on cotton. There's a West Virginian for you, Dr. Carter Woodson, the founder of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Dr. Woodson was raised in Huntington, West Virginia. Dr. Woodson started Negro History Week in 1926. He was the second African American to receive our degree in history from Harvard. W.V. Du Bois was the first. And he went to my favorite college in all the world, Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. You know, Berea College. Berea College was a fascinating place. Berea College was biracial and coeducational in 1855. That made some Kentucky politicians so upset that they closed Berea College in 1903. And they said, anybody that educates blacks and whites in the same room is a stench in the nostrils of God. This is a Christian. A Christian senator from Kentucky. He closed the school in 1903. That Berea has outlived him. The most famous and powerful West Virginia ever lived, I just said that. Who's the person on the left? She's a West Virginian. Yeah, Catherine Johnson. They call her a hidden figure until recently. I think Alan Shepard the first person went into space. He looked at 18 white male engineers. You know what he said? I'm going to go with that. And she put him in space and they said, she don't know what she's doing. She went to West Virginia State Oregon Institute, a little colored college. And there's only God knows how many West Virginia black folks are here. But Ed Capel was from Ekman, West Virginia. Ed was as far as I'm concerned, the father of Appalachian African Americans. He went to Concord College. Is it Concord? I don't say that. Concord. See, in my wife's hometown, she grew up in Concord in North Carolina, next to Charlotte. They were unemployed. Ed dedicated his life to these stories. So let's get started. That's me and my four brothers and sisters who are older than I am. Three of them are deceased. I'm sorry, two of them are deceased. One younger than me is deceased. That's my father on the right. My father worked for United States Steel, a coal company, one of the biggest coal companies in all the world was U.S. Steel. They owned Gary, West Virginia, too. They also owned Gary, Indiana, where they processed their steel. They also owned Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But my father still hates Pittsburgh Steelers. He's been dead 40 years. Because he said, they pay those boys more money to play football in one day than they pay me on food. And he did. That day, that check stuff was drawn on December 30th, 1946. I was 6 months old. Daddy brought home $47.50. And Daddy had 5 children. And he worked 79 hours. I owe my soul to the store. I was born one morning. The sun didn't shine. Pick up the shell. I rode 16 tons. Another 9 cold night. Come on, sing it, brother. Bless my soul. Daddy did that week after week after. I hate to admit it to you teetotalers, but the other night I bought a bottle of Jack Daniels, cost me $52. I paid more for a bottle of whiskey than my daddy. I bet some of y'all did that too, right? Sure. Yeah, just think of what our parents went through to raise us. And so you might notice Mama had 5 children in 7.9 months. We were called step children. Anybody know step? You said something, brother, about your grandmama had 72, something like that. I asked my father one time, I said, Daddy, I ain't trying to give you business, brother. But explain to me, how in the world did Mama have 5 children in 7.5 years? Because my sister, I have a sister exactly 11 months older than me, and it goes just like that. You know what my father said to me? He said, well, Billy, we lived in this narrow hollow, and the train would come to the hollow every morning at 4:30. whistling and a blowing and a clicking and a clanging. And he said, it'll be too early to get up. And it'll be too late to go back to sleep. And so Mama, and there were children up and down the street like that, just hundreds of children. Hundreds of children. And so I don't know how they did it, because Mama had 3 more children after me. And then her best friend died of something called breast cancer. I didn't understand how it was low. And Mama bought her 4 children in our house. And we had a 2-bedroom house with a slop jar still in the top of it. Did y'all have slop jars when y'all come up? See, brother, man, I'm so glad you did it. None of y'all had slop jars, all y'all had indoor toilets. Y'all was like brother in West Virginia. Well, we had an outhouse up on the side of the hill, and you kept a red and white, but Queen Elizabeth calls it chamber body. We simply called it a slop jar. My grandkids don't know a slop jar from a slop can. See, we kept a slop can to feed the hogs. All right, where's Appalachia? Let's go through that real quick. Everybody knows the white Appalachia is that white space in there, and the blue part is, and the only state, all of its counties are in the Appalachian region is West Virginia. Yep. 330 or so counties, 400 or so counties, 14 states, 27 million people live in that white space. But I don't think we can miss some of those people that are Appalachians. Because as you know, when they got ready to draw up the Appalachian region, Robert Byrd was sitting at the table. And he said, here's what we're going to do, buddy. He was just coming out of the Ku Klux Klan, by the way. Amen? It's rock solid right here, y'all. Because you know, when Mr. Byrd admitted he had been in the Klan, he went and met Martin Luther King. I'm sorry. I never. But anyway, when they drew the Appalachian region, it was to be central, it was to be West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and Southwest Virginia. That's all I remember. But the other politicians said, well, I'm not going to pay for it because I got some poor white people where I live too. So the next thing you know, Birmingham was in the Appalachian region. Pittsburgh. My brother's wife went to a college in Appalachia, and it's in Poughkeepsie, New York. She was the best. Did you know Cornell University is in the Appalachian region? Of course it is. So that's Appalachia. There we are. I see Willie in red up there. I hope we got in the right place. You see, Tupelo, Elvis Presley was in Appalachia. Greenville, y'all know all those places. That's what we call Appalachia. And there's y'all Appalachian Regional Commission Federal Co-Chair. I spoke to Gail Manchin about an hour last week. I spoke for the Appalachian Regional Commission at the Circle in Washington. And Calvin was mentioned, right? She heads up the whole agency. By the way, I want to say very quickly, this is not your grandmama's West Virginia anymore. Did you know the percentage of people named Jose and Lupita is much higher in West Virginia than the percentage of people named Willie? The percentage, y'all better get ready. I tell my children, my grandchildren, you're going to grow up in Houston, Texas, you got to learn how to speak Spanish. You're going to be reporting to somebody named Manuel. I'm telling you, Houston, Texas, 57. That's why they changed our laws in Texas. They're scared, they're running crazy. Lord have mercy. You know, I'm sorry. So when somebody comes up to you, brother, and say, hola, senor. Hi, y'all. Tortillas. The percentage of Latino and Hispanic people is 18.5%. You do the numbers. What is 18.5% of 1.8 million? It ain't your grandmama's West Virginia. And your grandchildren are going to grow up in a totally different West Virginia than Ann Thomas. Hola. Hasta la vista. That man there, John Stevenson, was my undergraduate advisor. And when I was getting ready to go to Notre Dame, which he helped me to do, I gone to Martin Luther King's funeral, and I came back from the funeral, and I met this priest while I was at the funeral, who said, "Are you going to grad school, son?" Then his father Larry taught. This was April 9th, 1968. I was almost 21 or something like that. And he said, "I'll help you go to Notre Dame." I said, "Man, they got a pretty good football team, don't they?" He knew me. I was from Harlan County, and the law is much more than that. And then between him and this man, they tried to talk me into studying about blacks in Appalachia as my thesis topic. And I said, "Excuse me, but no way, Jose." Because all I had ever read about white people in Appalachia was that they were toothless, they were incestuous. I had seen a movie called Deliverance. Y'all remember Deliverance? I mean, even recently, an author who is now running for Senator of Ohio, his name is J.D. Vance. Y'all familiar with J.D. Vance? J.D. Vance running for senator from Ohio. And J.D. Vance recently published a book called Hillbilly Elegy. Elegy, however you pronounce it. And he said that these Appalachian people have the most dysfunctional culture you ever saw. It's what explains methamphetamines and opioid addiction and all of the pathologies of white life in the mountains of the South. He blamed it on dysfunctional culture of Granny and Jethro. He thought of the concept of Southern crack. But you know that's what they call white people in the mountains of the South in California. Did you know that? Yes, they did. From New York to California, they considered whites in the mountains of the South the other America. They wrote a book called Other America, Michael Harris, 1968. I even said, boy, if there hadn't been no black people in America, I wonder who they would have picked on. Toothless, they handle snakes. Oh Lord, I mean, they made the white people in the mountains of the South, they made stereotypes about them second only to stereotypes about black people in the South, period. So you see, my brothers and sisters, y'all remember that movie? They paid Glenn Close them $50 million to make a movie a couple years ago called Hillbilly Elegy. And it's just a kind of, y'all remember that right there? There was a fellow once named Jeff Foxworthy. He might still be living, I'm sure he is. Jeff Foxworthy became rich making jokes saying, "You might be a redneck if." You remember that? I think about it, somebody said, "You might be an N-word if," they put you in jail. Or they put you in jail. But what I'm saying is that white Appalachians may be the only people who can be made fun of and not be accused of using racial slurs. Let's think about it. Jethro, who are the guys on the bottom right there? That was Hee-Haw. I asked my mama one time if she were in Appalachia. That's my mother. Her name was Pumpkin. And Mama was a coal miner's granddaughter. Mama was born in Benham, Kentucky in 1924. And you know, in the mountains of the South, most people, black and all white, call themselves Appalachians. That's a term they use in Hollywood and New York. I asked my mama one time, I said, "Mama, are you an Appalachian?" And she said, "Well, you know damn well I'm a Baptist." Mama never called herself an Appalachian. I'm sorry, she said, "You know, darn." That's I digress. That's where I grew up. I grew up on that street right there. And people used to, when I got to college, people telling me we were poor. And I said, "Man, I lived in this idyllic little place. I ain't going to bed hungry at night. Believe me, we had shoes. You know, I know a bunch of us were in our house, but we were never hungry. And my father was reading James Baldwin when I was 12. Daddy went to the 3rd grade. Daddy married Mama, she was 15 in 1938. I'm sure nobody here knows anybody in their family got married at 15 except me, right? Well, my grandmother and my mother got married before they were 16 years old. Get around the house, get them married. That's what they do. I got to learn things about what I think I know from a man named John O. Franklin on the top left of there. Dr. Franklin was the most prominent historian, period, wrote a book called From Slavery to Freedom. And I mentioned earlier I got to work with Mr. Haley. In fact, that picture on the left there are my grandchildren at the Haley statue down in Knoxville.
Let's get to the point. Black people in Appalachia, Ann Thomas represented a hardworking, family-oriented, religious woman who believed in high achievement in schooling. She had a neighborly spirit, and she was active in community organizations. She was patriotic. She had a great sense of humor. She was honest, and she was neighborly. Those are traditional Appalachian values for people black or white in these mountains. So I wrote my book because I think one of the things that has happened now is black folk has lost a lot of that stuff. And it worries me when I approach young black people in America, and I live in Houston, and I get to go all around. I spent last night with some black kids talking in Huntington, and I'll see some tomorrow afternoon in Morgantown, and then I'll go back to Houston for something on Friday. And it's Black History Month. I'm getting to go around. I'm learning. These kids don't know very much about black history, and it's to their disadvantage. It's to their great disadvantage. To their great disadvantage. As the famous William Faulkner once said, history is never dead. The past is never dead. In fact, it's not even the past. Because we are living some moments right now, y'all, that people lived when I was 20. And that was 50 years ago. It ain't got much better. Some of it has, but some of it hasn't. So that's why it ain't easy being a fraud. I'm sorry, it ain't easy being Black History Month. Let me tell you why. Because history tells people where they are on the clock of human history, on the clock of human geography. History tells people where they've been, what they've been, where they are, and what they are. And we've come to a point in American history where people say, we don't want to know about that anymore. And let me tell you who basically tells us that. It's this concept right here called critical race theory. Anybody familiar with that? Many Americans will tell you they're familiar with critical race theory and they don't know absolutely anything about it. These politicians have whipped up this frenzy, and I know some good old boys that can't spell critical, but they are out like that critical race theory, right? You know what you're talking about, man. They got you all confused, brother. And let me tell you who does. See, Black history is being painted away. You see what they get ready to paint over Martin Luther King's face there? And basically, they just roll Martin Luther King out every January 15th like he's Punxsutawney Fred the groundhog. Yeah, it's just a bunch of, it's just a check box. They stick it back in there the next afternoon. I hate to say it. I've watched it for all these years. The Martin Luther King Day. All the McDonald's and shoe companies and cufflink companies, they all get in on this. We love the kumbaya. Yeah, right. I hate to offend anybody, but one of the proponents of the fact that critical race theory is divisive and it's against American history and it's ideological poison, that's a quotation from former President Trump. And you're rock solid? Yeah. Okay, good. In 25 states, they are considering legislation and other steps to limit how race and racism can be taught. West Virginia is right on top. Florida? Oh, don't come to where I live in Texas. I used to think Kentucky was conservative. Texas is Kentucky on mega steroids. Unbelievable, unbelievable. In fact, just the other day, the lieutenant governor of Texas, a man named Ken Paxton, something like that, he proposed no university professor will be given tenure in the state of Kentucky who teaches history about race. Go Google it. If you don't believe me, everybody believes Google. I think Google probably got some problems. But Ken Paxton, they're proposing you cannot teach race. My daughter has graduate degrees in history. She teaches history in Houston, Texas. And she's scared to death. She said, hey, I gotta move back to New York. I can't stay here because they're saying I can't teach what I teach. I suppose soon they might say gross anatomy is such a hard thing for medical students, maybe we shouldn't teach doctors about the body. Let's leave that blood stuff out. Yeah. Crazy. And one of the things I'm going to end up here with is saying, the reason we take all this history away, when we forget about Lincoln School, when we throw out everything that Ann Thomas breathed and lived, that's why so many young black people are lost and confused and unsure and unclear and perplexed and disoriented and bewildered. It explains a lot of their social and psychological dysfunction. Go read Hillbilly Elegy again. You'll see what happens when young white people lose jobs, can't find anything, can't do anything. Only thing you do is trade a crack pipe. And these issues affect all of us. And a lot of it has to do with what my grandmother used to say. See, when I was coming along, Brother Mary, you might remember this, Jackie Robinson was once told, Jackie, you represent your race. That's what they did with that man. That was a horrible, can you imagine representing all white people? Yes. You know, you represent us. They used to tell me that when I was a kid. Don't you be a disgrace to your race. I was like, okay, Granny. What the hell? What are you talking about? But it's true. Granny would say, whatever happened to you, you can't do that. I mean, I find myself at 75 years old in fancy hotels, and when I get out of the tub from bathing, I look and see this ring. I look clean that because Granny would want, I wouldn't embarrass my grandma. Granny, would you get out of my head, please? You're not paying any rent. But I'm sure many of you carry things from your grandma. And we had these grandmothers in the black community who would say to you, an educated man like you, Billy, who doesn't have any moral scruples, is more dangerous than a crackhead with a gun. And she said, it's so many of these highly educated Negroes, they're crazy. I said, oh, Lord, Granny. In fact, Granny said that we were watching the confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas in 1992. Y'all remember Clarence Thomas hearings for the Supreme Court? They were up there talking about something on the top of a Coke can. Y'all don't forgot that, haven't you? Now Clarence Thomas is the longest serving person on the Supreme Court. And so Granny used to say some things to us, and I'm about done with this. Very quickly, Granny would, when she would say, and she would have said to Miss Thomas, she would say to Ann, you know, Ann, black folk done lost their stuff. Something's wrong. Anybody know what stuff is in here, sir? In the flat shirt? Stuff? You ever use that word? Leave my stuff alone? Huh? Anybody ever use the word, that fellow talks a lot of stuff? When I was young, I even heard people say, boy, that girl sure can strut her stuff. Maybe she's a baker or something, I don't know. My wife and I share a counter in our bathroom. Mine goes this way, hers goes that way. 7 feet long, big old barrel. And let me tell you, I can go in there and get a Q-tip out of the jar off of her side. A month later, I can put the top back. A month later, she said, hey, you did my stuff. Her mother was the first quarter I ever saw. I think she grew up with a depression, so she never got rid of any stuff. All of her stuff, she died with. And I learned 2 weeks after I married her daughter 52 years ago, don't ever say, Grandma, what all this stuff? And she looked at me and said, I don't know who you is, but this is my stuff. Black people have some stuff, y'all, and we got rid of it. Partly as a so-called integration was what we were doing. Integration, in my own view, as my granddad once said to me, it caused Negroes more problem than a kick in the ass by an Alabama mule. Because they got rid of all the black teachers. That's the first thing they did when they closed up Carver School. You couldn't have 2 football coaches. Which one do you think they kept? You couldn't have 2 chemistry teachers. They got rid of our English literature teacher who taught me about the Harlem Renaissance. So my brothers who came after me, when they integrated schools, they never heard about the Harlem Renaissance anymore. They never got to read James Baldwin. They never got to know about these things. And we took for granted. When we walked in our school, all the pictures up and down the hall of Booker T. Washington and Mary Anderson and Jackie Robinson and all these iconic historical figures. The other night I was somewhere speaking, and I invited 3 young black women out of the audience. I said, come here a minute, y'all. I want to do something. So I go in my pocket like a big shot, and I took out 3 $100 bills, and I handed each one a $100 bill. And I said, if you can sing the first verse of the Negro National Anthem, you can keep your money. Lift every voice and sing to earth and heaven ring.
I got my money back. But they can sing verse and rhyme from R. Kelly. They know Beyonce's songs backwards, but they cannot sing these sacred songs of Amazing Grace. They can't sing these sacred songs, I'm coming up the rough side of the mountain. And I'm saying those are things that we got taught that hammer certain values into our head that made us make it when things look really, really bad. When you by yourself and grandma whispers to you, you're gonna be all right, you're gonna be all right. Nowadays, kids turn to Snapchat. They turn to social media for their influence. That's why they lost their stuff, right? They lost their language, they lost how to be courteous, they lost certain rituals and relationships and practices and behaviors and values and thoughts and manners of acting. It went down the drain. Last illustration. That lady right there, for example, that's what I call my generic grandma, the great social influencers. The ones who would say, you whack like you got some sense. The lady that the young women would learn how to cook from. Y'all remember the story of a young black woman who went to Harvard Law School, and she brought this boy home, this young man home, she thought she could, marry him. Went to meet her grandmama, and the grandma cooked up this big meal with some German chocolate cake. Right? And so when they get back to New York, in the metropolitan New York, the guy said to the young woman, said, you know something? That was the best cake I ever had in my life. Do you know how to make that kind of cake like your grandma? She got on the phone, she called her grandma and said, Grandma, how'd you make that German chocolate cake? And grandma said, from scratch. The girl, the literate lawyer, immediately went down to Whole Foods stores and asked them, do you also scratch? I'm telling you, these young girls don't go and walk in the kitchen with grandma. They don't know how to cook this stuff. Grandma said, pinch of that. And you try asking her exactly how much of a pinch. She said, fool, you just know. So there's what we find ourselves with, where these young kids are no longer, don't even talk about wearing your pants down past your butt. It's worse than that. Because now they're wearing something down past what ain't in their heads. What Ann Thomas would have said, you should do like that. You should do like that. You represent too much, but it's another story. So what happens when your brain and your thoughts and your attitudes and your actions and your very life and destiny, if your most significant influences, see, a lot of people now are being influenced by people that grandma would say was bad, who's crazy. Grandma didn't use the word bad. You heard that? That's some of the people that influence us nowadays. I think there's some people out here that's influencing people who are pretty nuts. Dave Chappelle said something recently about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people that was just off the charts. How could you say that about people? And now, how could you say there's good people on both sides of this? You cannot look at Nazis and say there's some good ones. I don't care what you say. Now, like I said, the rocks might fall, so let's quit that. This guy right here, they have all these young people call themselves the B word. They're calling their sisters, they're gangsters, they're gangbangers, they're dogs and they're thugs. If you keep telling yourself over and over and over long enough that you're a dog, you're a thug, you're this, you're that, you become one. So a woman thinketh, so is she. So it makes me cry to see what I see when I know what our grandparents went through to get where we are. And now things are stifled so bad, and I go back to my hometown, the number of black kids going to college has dropped off precipitously since 1965 when I got out of high school. And that's part of what we're going on through is social media's got all this impact on these people's stuff. What happens with that stuff? Where does it go? What's the consequences when you lose that stuff? What's the consequence of having no more Ann Thomases as the role models around? I think I just went past it there. Oh, Lord. One more, I think. Maybe another one.
Okay, there's the last 4 black coal miners in my hometown, no more around. And that's where my mama played piano for 45 years on the right. There was the college, the excellent segregated school I went to and learned that when I was in 10th grade. That thing ran my daddy out of the coal mines. And we could go on and on, but I just want to show you how the black population went down even in this county over the last 50 years. And I'm trying to find what I want to finish up with. This is just all about how West Virginia, Kentucky, and all these places, the culture changed. So I'd like to know now, what is the nature of life for blacks and whites in these towns? Who are the role models? What's the nature of race relations in this county? What does it mean? And so generally, when I teach, I don't teach anymore that much. It takes me 16 weeks a semester to teach a course titled Blacks in Appalachia. And I think I've talked about it in 45 minutes. And my book is called A Warm and Insightful Memoir of Black Life in Appalachia's Coal Towns. And what I try to do in my book is tear apart the myth that all mountain people are white. A lot of people operate on the myth that no black people in Ohio County, West Virginia. And that all poverty is self-made. A lot of poverty is systemic. It's built into the system we live in. So that's what I know most about those places there, like Kimball and Keystone and Welch and Gary and Beckley, Bluefield and Princeton, and all those little mountain towns. That's what I did my work. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank y'all very much. I would be happy with Mr. Sean. I'll be happy to entertain a question too. Are we doing that, Sean? Right? Okay. If anyone has a question, I would be glad to entertain it. Yes, sir.
There was one of your slides where you showed the street upon which you grew up. You showed a photograph of your. Okay. And underneath there was a line that said, "Why did I choose this photograph?" And I'm waiting for you to.
Oh, okay. Thank you. You'll be 75 one of these days, man.
I'm a year away from that. Just don't tell me.
Yeah, well, by that I meant, you remember how your grandma or mine would, I'm sure somebody heard this, really always wear clean underwear, because you don't know if you're going to get underwear. Remember that? I was a grown man, I'm going to say, what underwear clean? Okay, so I chose that picture because I'm going to leave it up to the people in Hollywood and in New York to come up with the pictures of that they got all under the porch and the washing machine in the yard. I choose, I'm an industrial strength, optimistic man. And so, while there were poor people in our hometown that lived in the most horrible way, most of us didn't. So, I don't, you might have noticed throughout here. Here's an illustration, for example. I was raised at a time where, going back to that, I'm always under the microscope, and my grandmother had taught me, you never get a second chance to make a first good impression. Right? Remember that? And so, even now, when I don't want to, I find myself putting on a tie. And I also find, when I get to the Charleston Airport, go back home for, when I have on a shirt and tie, people treat me a little bit better for some reason. You'll be surprised. They treat you just a little bit better when they just look at you. Oh, I was in Chattanooga, and I rented a car, and the lady nice they said, pretty bow tie you got. And her son, not son, whatever she said. I said, thank you, she said. So she looked at my reservation, and she said, oh, you rent from us all the time. I said, yes, I do. She said, I'm going to upgrade you, buddy. She upgraded me to a 2022 Lincoln Continental. I said, no, Jack. So, all of a sudden, I try to tell my sons and our daughter, the grandkids, and let me tell you, there used to be a time, particularly in terms of, I don't know about you all, but in my work, every day, even in a convenience store, if I feel comfortable saying something to a young person, I'll say, you go to college? I spent 50 years of my life teaching college, that's all I've ever done. And so I'm constantly trying to encourage kids, constantly trying to talk to them. So if they see you presenting yourself a certain way, it was like my uncle who spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, you would thought Uncle Robert was still on duty all the time. Because he kept a certain way. And so those photographs, you can remember during the Civil Rights Movement, you rarely saw Martin Luther King without a shirt and tie. They very rarely, it was almost like, heck, I remember when I went to the Million Man March. Y'all remember the Million Man March in 1995? What some people would call the dishonorable Louis Farrakhan led it. But anyway, there was 1 million African American men on the mall that day. I was right there with a red, white, and blue bow tie. And there were airplanes, helicopters flying all over the place. There were snipers on every building on Constitution Avenue. There were garbage trucks stocking all the main thoroughfares. In other words, there was no ruckus like January 6, 2020. Because there had been black men out there on January 6, 2020. They be still scraping the blood off the buildings. Any rock calling? Yeah. I hate to say it, but that's the deal. And we were all dressed up in white and said, hey, we're just here to petition for our rights. That's all. We're not turn anything up. We don't roll like that. But the point is that, sir, I've been trying to say all along here, that lady Ann Thomas grew up with a certain framework, a certain value system that has been lost. That has been lost. And it's not just been lost amongst African Americans. It's all over. Yes, ma'am. Yes. I don't hear well, by the way, so I got to come back there where you are. I left my hearing aids in Texas. They hurt my ears.
As an older person from here in Zealand, I do remember Ann Thomas's husband, who had been a football player for the League Airmen. And after that, he was a successful insurance man, I believe. And what do you think influenced her as such a young girl to become educated? I mean, how did she? I think I heard that she was like the first minority student nurse in a local hospital or in the program or something.
I also read another person in the really, is it called a memory book from here in the library?
Memory Project.
Right. Bill Turner was his name, right?
Yeah.
William Bill Turner, the first black policeman
Yeah.
in this town. So my name is Bill Turner. Well, I think that going back to why did Ann Thomas choose to go to colleges, I think it was inherent in what I have been saying all along, and that is, there are probably some of you all sitting here who always carried this thing in your mind that said, empty pockets sure do make you want to do something better. Empty pockets are a great inspiration. And so I think Mrs. Thomas migrated here. She was born, what, 1919, I think? Yeah. That's what we're talking about, the first pandemic, the Spanish flu, Spanish flu, whatever it's called, 1938. And she was born in 38. I'm sorry, what did 1919? Oh, I'm sorry. But she lived until 2019. Yeah. So she grew up in a time, I think I explained to her the first part of what I was talking about, and that is when we lived under this apartheid. America taught South Africa how to operate apartheid. You know that, right? America perfected apartheid. And so another thing too, ma'am, is the African American women who were able to go to West Virginia State, unlike Miss Katherine Johnson, 90% of them, up until 1965 or so, were consigned to be teachers. They have no other occupation. And so I got taught in the 40s and in the 50s by women who went to Spelman College. They went to Fisk University. They went to Howard University. and then they came to these blue-collar schools throughout the South. They were the smartest people in the community, but they couldn't do anything. Now, my wife, by contrast, when she graduated college in 1968, she was a math major. And she was getting ready to go and teach math at a high school in Charlotte. And a guy stopped her and said, "How would you like to be assistant engineer for IBM?" Big Blue. My wife said, "What's that?" "We'll teach you how to do this." Now, you must know that a lot of women like my wife, or even I bet you had Miss Thomas been born a generation later, not even a generation later. If she'd been born in 1950, she probably would have been a physician. She probably would have gone on to medical school because things began to open up, in the generation of my wife. And so that this whole education thing. Another point, this sounds so personal, but I'm very proud of it. A few years ago, when our oldest sister died, we all came together on our front porch, because, we just got on the porch and everybody came to Kentucky to put our sister's ashes at the feet of our parents. And I stood back and I looked and I said, boy, I wish Dad and Mom was here now. Because I was looking at the fact that I went to college, the first one in my family, in 1964. I looked on that porch at my children, who went to Morehouse and went to Spelman and went to Duke. And I looked at my brother's sons, Justin. Justin went to Stanford. And Justin got an MBA from Columbia. And then I looked over here at my brother Tony, God rest his soul, his two daughters went to Hampton. Okay. And all these little grandchildren of this coal mine, we have a 16-year-old. And that's just 3 or 4 I'm naming, because we're saying that intergenerational thing, has kept intact in some families that I grew up with. I mean, my mother used to tell people, y'all know Bill's not a real doctor. Yes, she said, "I his cousin is." She's a gynecologist. Because Mama just looked at me like, he just talks. Yes, ma'am.
Just for the record, so that you know, this is Ann Thomas's granddaughter. And Ann Thomas was raised by a single mother who moved here.
And you should take the money and let
No. Honestly, I just enjoy being present and kind of taking all this in. It's still hard for me. I'm still.
You look like her, don't you?
Well, let me say something. I got dressed in my car now, okay?
But Ann was raised by a single mother.
You live here?
I do not. But to your point, she was very much about the stuff, right? And she was harmoniously non-judgmental in a way in which you don't see or even feel anymore. And I didn't realize all of the ways in which she would go to influence me, to be completely honest. But she would always say, everybody's got their share of stuff. Yes, their share of stuff, right? And she had these little isms, these things that she would say all the time, and that played back to me all the time, every day at some point. But the more you live, right, the more you realize that not only are the things that she believed, did she truly lived with such effortlessness, and I don't even want to say grace, because it was more genuine than that. And that, to me, is the stuff in which you speak of, and I hope that I can give that to my son, and I give it to my friends, and I know her friends give it to me, and I think if you knew her, or if you know of her in this case, you can't help but want to pay it forward in some way, in any way, because her entire life was based off of that. And it wasn't something that she just got up and said, I gotta go and help this person out, or I gotta stop by this place. I mean, it was who she was. It was the life that she lived, and I don't know.
I'm interested in your memory sound.
Hi.
Thank you
Love
so
you
much.
all.
I'm so glad you came.
Yes, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
All right. Any more questions?
One more question.
One more question? Yes, ma'am.
Did you know, you're from Kentucky and she was from Kentucky as a child. Did you know, what are your interests in her? Did you know her family?
Ms. Thomas?
Yeah.
No, I only read about her through she was in the library. But I think what I try to say is that Ms. Thomas represented a kind of era, a kind of persona. And it seems to me when you read about, I remember, what's it called again, Sean, the memory is online where all these people use African.
Memory project.
My mother was ill, housebound, and at that time was working for a local hospital.
Oh.
She used to call me. And he was too old.
Sounds like it, yeah. Well, once again, thank you all very much for coming. God bless you. I can take this off.